Next up, we have Lauren Auchter. Lauren started her career in edtech as an educator at science museums and transitioned to the engineering side with the help of Thinkful's Engineering Flex program. She continues having a positive impact on education now as a software engineering manager and technical lead at Instructure, creating accessible applications. When she's not coding, you can find Lauren chasing her toddler or surrounded by her latest crafting endeavor. Take it away, Lauren.
So I'm really excited to get to give this talk, navigating career change. It's something that we all go through. There's a link to the slides that'll go back up at the end. Thanks, Mo. And yeah, let's get started. So first thing is, what is this talk even about? So it's gonna be a lot of tips and tricks for navigating changes with some examples from my career. I have had the privilege of getting to mentor and be mentored by a lot of people. This is a common topic that comes up, so I've tried to distill all of those conversations down into a 30-minute talk. So we're gonna get a whole bunch of examples and hopefully leave here with some good things to try. About me, I am recently an engineering manager at Instructure. Up until about a month ago, I was a senior engineer and technical lead, so it's been really fun to get to move into a leadership position. But I have kind of been all over the place. My degree is in music education. I worked for science museums, was briefly a middle school science teacher before I landed as a software engineer. So we're gonna learn about those pivot points and kind of how I navigated them. So to start off with, pivoting. Why pivot? What is a pivot? They can be huge. They can be changing your field entirely, or they can be smaller and more focused on switching the type of work that you do now. So when I'm going through a pivot, I want to ask myself some questions. First thing I ask is, what is my career goal? Is it likely to happen, or are you okay staying at a lower level where you are? Kind of thinking about what's the time frame that you want to try to land in those positions. Like when I was a teacher, I knew I did not want to be a vice principal or a principal, but I did not want to be a teacher forever. I wanted to have change in things in my career. So there wasn't really a goal that I was shooting towards. And then this is one of my favorite quotes. If you've never heard James Quick talk, he's really awesome. But he said, don't let your career be a coincidence. So thinking about what is the path to your goal, do you like the jobs in between now and that goal? Because you will have to do them. You can't just skip over. I have career ambitions, and I like having a path that I can follow. That's really hard to do in nonprofits, and that pushed some of my decision to pivot into a much larger sector, into a much larger field. And then the last thing I ask myself is, am I making the most of my skills? How do you want to grow? Do you want to grow, or are you at a point where you want to keep doing the thing that you're already doing and just kind of continuing to dive into that? This was a big driver for me moving into management, because software engineering used my technical skills, but management gets to use all the educator skills that I spent years building, and I'm really excited to get to like truly leverage again. So key considerations as you are going through these changes. Thinking about, what are you hoping a pivot is going to change? What are your goals after a pivot? What do your career goals look like after you've made that change? Is a pivot going to change the space that work takes up in your life? And are you okay with that change? For me, I was looking for a change that was going to leave more space for my life, and my work was going to take up less room. That may not be what you're looking for. You may want the opposite of that. So thinking about what is it that you are looking for, and is it going to match that balance that you want? This is another favorite quote of mine, which was pursuing energy and not passion. How do you feel at the end of the day? Does a pivot leave you energy for the things that you want to do in your life? When I was working at nonprofits, the answer was no, I do not like how I feel at the end of the day. I do not have energy for my life. I need to have more space for that. And then thinking about your career trajectory impacts. If you are changing fields entirely, you are likely going to start at or close to the beginning again, and that is okay. You are bringing awesome skills with you that are going to help you move forward more quickly. When you think about yourself compared to like a fresh college grad, when you're trying to make those transitions after you've been working for a while, you are bringing a ton of soft skills with you, a lot of ability to communicate, to navigate professional workplaces. These are things that set you apart. These are things that make it easier for you to pick up the job and get going and get rolling. And they're going to help you move up, even though you are having to move back up, but you're moving back up more quickly. So when you're going through these kind of things, it's just making sure that you have a clear picture of what this change means. A pivot can't solve everything. There is good and bad in all work. So there's always going to be that balance. When you're trying to make these big changes and you're thinking about the things that you want to do, this is usually when we start second guessing ourselves. So, there's that voice in your head. The first thing to remind yourself is it is okay to be uncomfortable. Discomfort is part of growth. Now, we're talking about discomfort, right? We're not talking about full-blown panic, pain, I can't do this. We are talking about like, I am uncomfortable and I can sustain this feeling and I can push through it. So acknowledge the way that you're feeling, like this makes me nervous, this makes me a little afraid, I am uncomfortable, that's okay. Trying to ignore those feelings are not going to make them go away. You can't get rid of imposter syndrome by pretending that you don't feel it. It is there. So acknowledge it and let it have that ability to release, and don't let it rule your decisions. One of the ways that I like to push through this discomfort and stop second guessing is with baby steps. Give yourself the chance to answer some of those pivot questions before you've made the full leap into the change that you're trying to do. So spend some time in your new focus area. Like if you're changing fields, go to a meetup. See, do I like talking about it? Do I like the people in the field? Do I like talking to the people in the field about this thing? Do some free online classes if it's a new area for you that you can do that. If you're trying to change the type of work you're doing, like for the move into management, start mentoring people. That doesn't require a full commitment of leaving the job that you're doing now, but you get the chance to build skills, to test them out and see, does this answer the things? Does this give me more energy? Am I feeling more drained? Kind of, dip your toes in the water, get that baby step, and then you can step back if the answer is nope, not for me. Get feedback from your mentors. You hopefully have mentors. If you don't, welcome. You're in a room full of people who will build connections with you. Full field pivots can mean that you have less people to talk to. So go network, go try to build some of those relationships, but also make sure that you are leaning on your loved ones and those with your best interests in mind. It gives you a chance to just kind of throw it out there and see what those reactions are. And then, in case you missed it, networking is pretty important. Networking achieves so many things, right? You can get insight into companies, you can get referrals, you can get help getting started or moving forward in your career, building those mentor relationships. One of the things I love about networking is this is a huge field. There is a ton of different types of work, and every time I go to an event, I learn about a specific part of this field that I didn't even know existed. I didn't realize that this was a job that you could do. And if you go to these events, you may find something that it's oh man, that's the perfect fit for me. That's exactly the kind of thing that I want to be in. So those are the baby steps that I like to take when I'm trying things out. Now, after you have convinced yourself that, okay, I'm not second guessing this anymore, yeah, I want to do this, now you feel guilty. So we got to let go of that guilt. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to reframe our feelings. As I say to my toddler, guilt comes in all sizes and degrees. We have some big feelings around these. So trying to switch from a guilt-focused mindset to more of a positive mindset. For me, a little way that I do this is, you're falling asleep and you're replaying that embarrassing thing you did in middle school. Choose a happy memory to relive instead of the embarrassing one. Teach your brain to focus on what you love and are excited about. Focus on what you're gaining. Feel appreciation for the things that you've learned and the impact that you've had instead of feeling bad about the things that you might be leaving behind. Okay, so we've reframed our feelings, but we still feel guilty. So we're not going to allow guilt to change our decisions. Your reasons for wanting to make a change are valid. Your guilt does not change those reasons. And when you are still in this place, what I like to do is I like to flip my perspective. So if a colleague that you like and respect, that's an important piece, that you like and respect did this, how would you feel? And it works for big and small things. Like there's Dan on my team, who I absolutely adore, is my go-to person that I think of when I'm trying to flip my perspective. So for a small thing, I started snoozing Slack after 5 p.m. so I don't get notifications on my phone or devices. And it's I felt bad about doing that. And it's well, if Dan did this, how would I feel? I wouldn't notice. I wouldn't care. It wouldn't bother me at all. So why do I feel bad about doing it? And then thinking about kind of larger things. If he left our team tomorrow, I would, of course, be devastated and would miss working with him so much. But I would not resent him. I would not be angry with him. Those negative emotions that are feeding my guilt would not be present. So I need to stop imposing them on myself, because that's not how they're going to feel about me. It's how I think they're going to feel about me, and it's not accurate. So those are the things I like to try when I'm trying to release all of that guilt that I have been feeling. So we're going to jump into some examples here. We're going to start with the kind of smaller in-field pivot. So I left a Title I school to go teach at a magnet school in another county. Still a middle school science teacher, but with a new kind of focus on that work. When I made this switch, why? Surprise, surprise, money factors into things, especially when you don't make a lot of it. Florida had no state minimum pay at the time, so the variation between counties was enormous. And you need money to live. So yeah, that was definitely part of it. End career goal alignment is also a big factor here. The magnet school put me in a city with more museum opportunities, and I wanted to get back to science museum education. And it was also partnered closely with a science center, so it lets me get closer to where I ultimately really want to be. Letting go of the guilt of that change. It's hard to leave students behind. It's hard to leave a school, especially a Title I school, where you know that they need a lot of help and resources. So instead of focusing on feeling really bad about it, I'm going to focus on the positive impact. The students had a really fun year with me. I brought all of my hands-on learning from the science centers I had been at before, and we did hands-on labs every single day. So I know that they had a good year. I know that they learned a lot and they gained a lot. And so, they had a good experience. I'm thankful I got to do that with them. And then honestly, you have to acknowledge the improvement in yourself. This was a job that ended in tears most days. It is the hardest job I have ever worked. So as much as I'm, thankful that I had the opportunity to have an impact, I was really happy to have a change and to be in a different situation. So it just kind of lets you release those feelings and refocus. When we're looking at slightly larger, so a type of work pivot. I left public school teaching to return to museum education. So still an educator, but that switch from formal to informal education, shifting my focus of work. So why leave? Work-life balance factors in a lot here. I was ultimately just unhappy as a teacher. The schedule is not for me. Do not ask me to wake up at 5 a.m. to go to work. I just can't do it. I just can't. It's too early. I'm not a morning person. I really can't stand it. It's really hard to get time off when you're sick, and that starts wearing you down. The first school I taught at, they would enter you into a raffle for gift cards if you came in when you were sick, because it was so hard to find subs. That is not a healthy environment, mentally or physically. And it just really wasn't the right fit for me. And career goal alignment continues to play in here. I wanted to be at Science Center, so I left and I went back to a Science Center. I knew that there wasn't a career ladder for me in public education, so going somewhere that there were steps that I could take and could try to progress through is ultimately a positive change. Letting go of guilt. So this was a tough one. This is one where the guilt kind of still remains because I broke the cardinal rule of teaching. I left in the middle of the school year. Ultimately, I needed to do what was right for me and my family and put our needs first. Was this what's best for my students and my coworkers? No, it wasn't. But it was what was best for me. It's when the opportunity was available, it put me closer to my family, and it was an opportunity that I needed to take. So this was a time where I definitely had to flip my perspective and remember being a student who had teachers who left during the year, remembering having colleagues who left during the year, and ultimately it is not the end of the world as much as it feels like it in that exact moment. And it gives me a chance to appreciate the skills that I built. I got to deepen my skills as an educator, and I got to practice having some really hard conversations. Telling your principal you're leaving in the middle of the school year is a deeply uncomfortable conversation. But it's something that you have to go into being forthright and honest, saying, I have an opportunity that I need to take. You can't control the other person's reactions in a negative conversation, but you still have to be able to sit there and say the things that you need to say so that you can move forward and continue on. As much as it would have been nice to be able to just like ghost the school and just like not have to face it, that is not reality. You can't do that, right? And hard conversations will always be a part of our work. So it was a chance to practice doing that. And then kind of my last piece for letting go of guilt was really just confirming that formal education was not the right fit for me. So I reframe and I focus on the fun memories that my students were left with, the fun memories that I have with them, rather than the fact that I left. But ultimately, the guilt that I still kind of feel didn't change my decision. It didn't change my needs, and so I still took that step and continued to move forward. For my last example, this is the big field pivot. This is leaving the nonprofit education world to be a software engineer. So switching from being an educator to a technical role, it's a big move, kind of scary, but hey, it worked out. So why pivot? Surprise, surprise, burnout. Nonprofit education, I was really, really burned out. I was asked a question when I was interviewing for my job at Learn Platform about what don't you want to do in this job? And immediately it's like, I don't want to work with customers. I need a break from a public-facing role. Those negative interactions would just sit with me and weigh on me, and I felt just so like heavy at the end of the day. And that's part of that burnout. That's part of that. I needed a break from the way that that job was structured. Compensation is absolutely part of it. Education does not pay well. This is not a secret. But it's not just your short-term compensation. It's also looking at long-term. So like when I went through my boot camp and I switched into software engineering, I almost doubled my salary just in that one move. But the compensation cap in the software field is so much higher than it is in the nonprofit field. And you're gonna move up those rungs way faster in engineering than you're going to in nonprofits. So, when I'm thinking about like, what's the life I wanna provide for myself and my family, that is much more easily achieved in software engineering than it is in nonprofit education. And then energy is such a big factor. My work was taking too much energy from my life. I was working a lot of nights and weekends, so I was not really seeing my spouse. That's definitely not sustainable for having a family. I was taking a lot of creative energy, pouring energy into the kids that I was working with, into the projects that I was leading, and I just felt tired and drained at the end of the day. And while it was easier to take time off at a museum than at a school, it's still challenging, and there's a lot of guilt when you step away for any amount of time. It's pretty rare for somebody to take like an entire week off of work, much less like a 2-week vacation or something. There's just a lot of an expectation that you are pouring a lot of yourself into these jobs. And then the career ladder ambitions. I like having a path I can follow. That's something that's important to me. My ambitions in museums would either require relocating or spending a lot of time for no more money in positions while I wait for something to maybe, hopefully, open up someday. And a big factor for me in the museum that I was at is thinking about that ladder. I didn't like the next step in the organization. Those jobs were terrible. They were working really closely with someone I did not like and liked that I had a buffer from. So it's like, I don't want to do your job, but I don't want to move, so how do I move up? So I've really enjoyed being able to move up the ladder in software engineering and have the ability to kind of control the pace of my own career more than I could in nonprofit education. So this was a big, big guilty decision, and not just guilt, but grief. I loved my team. They are still some of my closest friends. It's really hard to say goodbye to education as a whole. So even though it didn't fit my long-term needs, it was really hard to say goodbye. So I decided I'm going to give myself a very long goodbye, a 9-month-long goodbye, where I enrolled in a boot camp while I continued working full-time. It gave me, again, that kind of baby step where, let's say I get to the end of boot camp and I can't find a job, I at least haven't abandoned this job that in the short term I do enjoy. I do get satisfaction out of it, even if it's not the right long-term fit. And so I'm not having to, dive into the deep end of the pool quite as hard trying to make that transition. And it gave me a chance, because of that long timeline, to ensure my team was set up for success and that everything would be able to move well after I left. And that time to ensure I liked my new direction was not just spent on boot camp, but it was months of networking and going to workshops and doing online courses before even enrolling in my boot camp. So I could really test the waters and see, is this going to be the right thing for me to move into? Even when I was in the boot camp, I applied for scholarships to conferences so that I could try to go to things and learn more and network and meet people and just get to build those skills. Shout out to Women Who Code, RIP. They very kindly were the source of a bunch of those scholarships. So these are the things that I have tried in my career, and I want to leave you with a few things to try as you go forward. So when you're asking yourself, do you like how you feel at the end of the day? The answer doesn't have to be a big old nope. It can also just be I could feel better, right? So try setting a new boundary. Put a block on your calendar for lunch. I promise you, you can do it. You can do it. You can decline meetings. You can rearrange things. Take some time away from your computer. But just try adding that little boundary and giving yourself the chance to maybe feel a little better because you've actually stepped away and taken a break in your day. Remember that it's okay to be uncomfortable, so take a baby step and do something that is uncomfortable for you. Maybe that's attending an event or taking on a project that scares you just a little, discomfort, not pain, but try something that makes you uncomfortable and try to push yourself into some of that growth. Acknowledge those feelings. It does not help to keep them bottled up. Express them to yourself in a journal, to a trusted coworker or a friend, but release them. There are so many times I have written a Slack message that starts off with venting in all caps. And sometimes I just need to write it and delete it. Sometimes I'm sending it to someone. It's I need to complain about this. But let those feelings out and give yourself a chance to not hold on to them anymore. Try flipping your perspective. Next time you make a change, reverse those roles and see how you feel. Even if it's something you don't actually feel bad about right now, practice what it's like to think about this from somebody else's perspective so that when you do feel bad, it's easier to make that switch and to be able to give yourself that release. And lastly, really do some networking. I am what you would call an extroverted introvert. This is really draining. I will have to spend a lot of time quietly alone tonight to recover. So it doesn't have to be big events when you're talking about networking. Go to a 20-person happy hour meetup in your area. Join a Slack or a Discord and participate in the conversations on your schedule and when you have capacity to. But if you wait to build those relationships until you need them, they won't be there and you won't have them to rely on. So start building them now. It's something that it doesn't have to be big, it can be in little ways, but you want to start doing this. And I promise you, the more that you make those connections, the easier it's going to be to help open those doors for others. So that's my talk. Thank you.